Check Podcasts. Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and this is Chamber Chats, being recorded, as always, in the podcasting studios of Czech Television. I begin, as always, by acknowledging that I live and work in the ancestral unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt. And Chamber Chat is made possible through the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union. Have you been on an airplane lately? Have you heard stories from people who have been through an airport lately? Lots of news out there, lots of information out there. We want to talk about that today because maybe some of that stuff is a bit misrepresented sometimes through people's experiences. A couple of guys that know all about that join me today to talk about that. Serge Corbeil is the Director of Government Relations, Local and Provincial for Air Canada. Serge, welcome.
Hello.
And Geoff Dickson is the President and CEO of the Victoria International Airport. Geoff, nice to see you again.
Yep. Hi, Bruce.
So what I want to do, gents, if we can, is sort of just go right back and retrace the early stages of the pandemic, what happened then and how we found ourselves in the position we are now. So, Geoff, initial responses, actions your organization had to make back in March of 2020.
Yeah, it was quite a time because the orders were coming on two fronts. There was one, you've got a nationally regulated industry, aviation, and so you're getting guidance from PHAC federally with respect to the borders and international travel, but there wasn't really a clear policy on domestic travel, province to province to province. So that's where the Confederation comes in, and you have each of the provincial health authorities making those decisions. But as an airport, we made a conscious decision to stay open 24/7 and keep the aircraft moving. Clearly shutting down portions of the building. When you see your business go from to down 98%, it's just absolutely stunning. But the airlines kept flying, reduced schedules, and thankfully, Air Canada in particular kept their service flying right through the worst of it in the first 3 months of the pandemic.
Yeah, so Serge, let's go back to those early days as well in the halls of Air Canada, all over the world. You're an airline servicing the entire world, not just this region. What sort of things were happening in those very early days?
Lots was happening, and as Geoff was saying, I mean, for us, it actually started a little earlier in March because as what was not at that time a world pandemic, or had not been declared by the World Health Organization as such, we were already seeing the signs of reduced travels because COVID-19. And it was not even known as COVID-19 in those days, as we recall, was having an impact already on our company, on our network, on airlines, generally speaking. So we had started to scale back a little bit of our flying, most particularly into the China market, which for Air Canada was an important market then, and we saw the reduction in bookings and people already canceling. So that was a bit of the canary in the coal mine for us. And then came March when the government announced some of the restrictions of movement of travel for people and internationally and then domestically as well, some of the provinces. So the impact for us started in that midpoint of March of 2020. It was fast and furious, where we had to make some very, very hard decisions for our partners, airports, for our customers, but also for our employees. In April of that year, we had to let go, furlough 20,000 of our colleagues at Air Canada. It was very, very difficult. We went from the best year we've had in 2019 to that start of 2020, where we had to scale back our network, and we were flying about 10% of our network at that time. And as Geoff was mentioning, we kept flying, though. Even with that minimum, we kept flying. It was never an option for us to stop altogether. But in BC, we went from 15 airports to 5 where we were operating. One of those 5 was indeed Victoria. So those were the I want to say those were the dark days, that March to April, June of that 2020.
Yeah, they sure were. And Geoff, you talk about being, down by over 90%. Yet, as Serge said, there were planes flying, not very many of them, but you did make that pledge to keep the airport open. So even if there's just one or two flights a day, you still have a pretty robust staff in place, right? There's a lot of people still working because they have to be.
Well, there is, whether you have one flight or 200 flights, and you need a designated fire crew, you need maintenance people, you need security officers to inspect the terminal building. You need screening officers for individuals to go through the flight. So, yeah, the staffing complement doesn't change that much at an airport by flight activity. It's much more pronounced in the airline side of the business than it is in the airport side. But yes, it's when you instantly see your costs to a certain degree fixed and your revenues disappear instantly, as I was saying,
Yeah.
It's quite stunning. It is quite stunning, and I think many of us in the industry were all just like deer in headlights, because nobody really had a playbook, certainly how to go through this, other than, we're going to make some cost-cutting decisions very quickly, and some very difficult decisions quickly, and hope to get some good, accurate, and clear guidance at both a provincial and federal level from the health authorities, and from the governments over time, that we would see the kind of financial assistance they were providing to the aviation industry in other countries step up and maybe do the same with the airports and the airlines.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that again in a second, too. Airports, by the way, operate in Canada as a nonprofit. We can touch on that shortly. So, Serge, I want to go back to you when you said 20,000 people were furloughed, obviously because the planes weren't flying. Some of what we're seeing now is because there are staffing issues. So of those 20,000, have some of them been able to come back, or have you had to find new people?
Well, we had to find new people. Some people retired. I think
Right.
Air Canada is an employer of choice in Canada. We've had some very long-standing employees who, after decades of service, decided to retire, and we can't blame them. But we've rehired. We're actually currently, our levels of staffing are about 97% of what they were pre-pandemic. Now, it's not necessarily all those employees that were with us that came back, but we're at 97%. We're still only operating 80% of our capacity, because while we look at the first few months of 2020, with the desire not to go back to that, this pandemic is not over. There are still government measures in place that are impeding in some ways us airlines and airports of being back to the famous normal. But from a staffing issue, from airplanes in the field and flying, we're back to basically what we were, or very close to what we were in 2019. So the staffing issues is not necessarily what's causing some of the disruptions that we've seen in the past few months.
Yeah. Geoff, you brought up the idea of supports from government, which were going out the door to all kinds of sectors, but yours in particular was one that was kind of an interesting circumstance. I want to talk about that next. We are talking about air travel involving airlines and airports today on Chamber Chats. My guests are Serge Corbeil, who is the Director of Government Relations, Local and Provincial for Air Canada, and Geoff Dickson is the President and CEO of Victoria International Airport. So, Geoff, we saw huge amounts of money being directed in support funding from the American government. Canada didn't quite see the same thing. Can you walk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, it was quite stunning for all of us, both in the airport and airline sectors, where we saw, $40-50 billion worth of financial support giving out to the carriers and the airports, and it was almost overnight. And it was done in 2 or 3 tranches, I think, over time. But it was immediate and impactful, and it was a recognition how important a healthy, vibrant air sector is to an economy or to a region. And we saw it around the world. And yet the Canadian model was very much, well, we'll give maybe a little bit of financial support in time, but we're going to do it through a wage subsidy. So we're not going to do it to any industry in particular. And you can apply for that. And in fairness, late in the game, some funding came for the airports, but in total, it was about $1 billion. So if you put it in perspective against the US of 10 times the size, you would have sort of a comparable amount would have been $4 or $5 billion in terms of aid for our industry. And what I get concerned about is it just sets the whole industry back 5 or 10 years as it repairs its balance sheet as things normalize again. And I just, even to this day, I don't understand the responses of the federal government. It was just slow coming, and there was almost just ignoring the importance of this sector.
Serge, how did that impact Air Canada?
It's a similar story. We looked at what airlines around the world receive in direct support by their national governments. Some independent studies, Intervista is a big one company who did an analysis, and the aviation support per departing seat, which is a measure that's used around the world. You look at France was $66, the United States was $62, and in Canada it was $2. And the support was not even direct support. It was mostly, there was the wage subsidies that every employer was allowed to receive, which we did receive as well, and that's helped us. But the rest was mostly in the form of repayable loans that they gave us, and on the airports, we all agree, and we're all working to eventually convince government to use the airports in Canada, the national airport system, as what they are. It's an economic development engine that should be seen as such. Last week, the U.S. government announced again support for 85 airports in the United States, direct infrastructure dollars, which is not the case. Canada has a user pay model to this day, and it was the same model through the pandemic, and that continues. So looking to the future, that is certainly something that we need to have a close look at.
Yeah. I want to stick with you for a second, Sarah. So when this all started to happen and all the airplanes were taken out of service and they weren't flying, where were they?
They were parked at different airports where room, because we were not all airlines in the world were parking aircraft. So we had some in the desert, and we had some parked in Canada at different airports with the weather systems and all that. So some of them were moved. But even though they were parked, there were still costs associated with that, because you can't just park them and forget about them. So there are maintenance checks that need to happen from time to time, starting the engines from time to time. We saw ups and downs through the pandemic, and this summer was really the summer of where we're closest to pre-pandemic. So it was our best summer, generally speaking, of the last 2 years. So.
Were there pilots that had to be recertified because they hadn't flown for a period of time?
Yeah, they go through, Transport Canada, as the civil aviation regulation. So it's all spelled out in that. So pilots that need to be recertified, some of them had to go through their medical certification. We do have, and we kept some, as I said, a lot of our pilots active during the pandemic. And so they were rotating different flights. But those who had been off for a longer period of time, some of them had to recertify. Some of them kept their certification, but then they have to go through simulator work. Again, at Air Canada, we do own simulators. We operate simulators, so we were able to be fairly quickly ready, no pun intended, to take off again.
Right. Geoff, I think this is a question for you, but the process of going through the airport itself involves customs services, Canadian Border Services people. It involves baggage handlers. It involves all those kinds of people. How robust was their sort of profile, and how much work were they doing at the time? And how many of them have now had to be replaced?
Yeah, and I think that's, we had to find maybe a weakness, the biggest weakness across the aviation ecosystem. I would think it would be a few of the government agencies that maybe didn't ramp up as quickly as they might have. And I would say CATSA, which is the screening agency, which is a federally run crown corporation. They were, behind in sort of staffing and ramping up. I know they've made some good progress in the last number of weeks and are getting very close to what their pre-pandemic staffing levels were. But going into the summer, they were over 1,000 screeners short, which is quite stunning. And at our airport alone, they were down just as of 3 weeks ago, 20% below where they were
Wow.
pre-pandemic. So there's a ways to go for them. NAV Canada is another not government agency, independent company. They have some shortages of air traffic controllers. And in terms of the CBSA, which is the immigration side, more for dealing with the international, I think their challenges are more just processing times with the Arrive Canada app and vaccine verification. Those kind of elements, thankfully, testing's been moved out of the airports. That was slowing things down. So, I mean, we're certainly getting a lot better than where we were. And when I say we, I'm talking nationally, the airport industry. And Toronto's really the bellwether, and they're not where they want to be, but they're quantum from where they were 3 weeks ago.
Let's look ahead next to the future. We're talking airports and airlines today on Chamber Chats. Serge Corbeil is with me. He's the Director of Government Relations, local and provincial level for Air Canada, and Geoff Dickson, President and CEO of Victoria International Airport. Geoff, you and I have talked about the prospect of new routes coming into play to and from Victoria. Tell me what that looks like in the future.
Well, I think it's Air Canada just tripling their capacity into Victoria, and then we'll all be happy. No, I mean, where we are right now overall at Victoria, our capacity levels are, total is about 90%, 95% of where we were pre-pandemic for the summer. So it's robust. I think the biggest dynamic that we're seeing in the Canadian domestic industry is the ultra low cost carriers and the rise of them. If you look at like between Swoop and Lynx is a new one, and Canada Jetlines and Flair, if they execute all their fleet plans by 2028, that's 147 aircraft, which is the size of WestJet. So I don't think it's all going to happen. I mean, I do like to see some of them succeed, but I think it's going to be very challenging. So that's been a big focus for us, is securing the business. Flair has become the third largest carrier now at YYJ and growing. And so that's where it is. The US markets, I think, are going to take a bit of time to come back for us. The US carriers right now are very, very much focused on core US routes and not looking as much as the Canadian markets. And WestJet is actually looking at sort of revamping its whole schedule in the West. And Air Canada, they've been great at growing service into YYJ with New Montreal nonstops and building the Toronto frequencies, Alberta services in Vancouver. And, we're hoping there'll be more coming, but there's certainly been a lot of growth from Air Canada at YYJ over the last 5 years.
What about across the country, Serge, as you're getting back to, I hate to use the word normal, but things are kind of emerging back again. What sort of route adjustments are going to be made or expansions by Air Canada?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, our core approach to our network planning has not changed. So we're what we call a hub and spoke airline. So, and when you're an international airline with lots of big planes of wide body aircraft, you need those spokes in the system to bring people to where those wide bodies are. So you can actually, fly multiple times a week from Vancouver to Australia, for example. You can go to New Zealand. You can go to India. Those you need a lot of people to make those flights profitable. So the hub and spoke allows us to do that. So that's not changing. And the other part of our strategy is what we call our Six Freedom strategy, which is airline lingo for some of the rights that you have with flying to and from other countries. So we're actually bringing a lot of American travelers on Air Canada planes via airports in Canada. So there's an economic impact there, positive. And we're flying them to international destinations. The Americans been doing that for a long time. We decided to do that with quite a lot of success, and we're going to continue on that. That's why, for example, we announced recently that we have this new joint venture with United Airlines, for example, which will allow us to refine the partnership we already had with United Airlines, which should be a plus for Canada and for Canadians. And down the road is allowing customers that are in the Victoria region, for example, to either directly or with one stop, to basically be able to reach all the destination that Air Canada has toward the world. That cannot happen all directly from Victoria, but we try to reduce that number of stops and time between stops so that you're as efficient. That's good for the leisure travelers, for tourism, and also for economic development.
Okay, time to wrap it up, gentlemen. But very quickly, I ask you this question. Serge, what advice do you have for travelers right now?
Travel more. Don't be afraid. You'd be surprised. Frankly, don't believe everything you read in the media. I think for the most part, travel has been good. We know that the vast majority, 95, 98, 99% of our customers get to their destinations. There are hiccups. There's always hiccups. It's a very complex system, but don't hesitate to travel.
Yeah. And Geoff, the airport experience, what advice do you have for travelers?
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Serge says, is that it takes people a little while to sort of come out of the 2-year pandemic bubble and get that confidence again. But the experience is great. Generally, relax, give yourself maybe a little bit more time to get through security and get ready. There are more inexperienced travelers flying. There's probably a higher proportion of leisure travelers than business travelers, so it takes a little bit longer to process through security. But the experience is great, and it's Canadians love to travel, need to travel. It helps drive our economy, and let's get everyone traveling, just like it was pre-pandemic.
Geoff Dickson is the president and CEO of the Victoria International Airport, and Serge Corbeil is the director of government relations, local and provincial level for Air Canada. Gentlemen, great to have you both back on the Chamber Chat. We will look forward to speaking with you again, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
And that's Chamber Chats. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you next time.